Ladies and gentlemen, from a catacomb buried deep beneath the streets of the New World Order, this is the Remnant Underground. And now, here's your host, Michael J. Matt.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for Remnant TV. We are on location at the Argument of the Month here in South St. Paul, Minnesota, the Church of St. Augustine. Our featured guest debater tonight, of course, is Remnant columnist Chris Ferrara. Everyone knows Chris. Chris, how you doing?
Good. I feel like I'm at a sports cast.
Yeah, it's a little bit. We've got the tent out back. Everyone's having a cigar and a beer right now, but the room's starting to fill up. It should be a great night.
Where's the cage for the cage match?
Yeah, we'll set the cage up. It's coming. So essentially tonight what we're going to do is we're going to debate evolution. Now, do you know, Chris, that tonight at the AOTM there's going to be no recording of what's going on, so you can say whatever you want tonight, and no one will ever find out except
like
for
I
who's
wouldn't
in this
do
room.
that otherwise.
Exactly, exactly. So everybody out there who's upset because we're not videotaping it, not every AOTM is taped. This is one of those ones where what happens at the AOTM stays here. Yeah. So it's going to be a rip-roaring fight. Chris, let's just, I don't know, I really don't have much prepared in terms of specifics to ask you, but let's
Neither do I.
Let's just, you've been at this for a long time. We've done some stuff in the Remnant on evolution. I sense that people are getting really sick and tired of being lied to by the scientific establishment. Is that kind of what motivates you to get out and debate this?
The weariness with this fairy tale, which purports to explain how everything came to be, but actually explains nothing, is spreading beyond the ranks of believers into the ranks of atheists. And I'm going to mention a couple of examples tonight. One of them is a member of the French Academy of Sciences, and another is a professor at NYU. And they're basically saying that the recent discoveries in the area of molecular biology and genetics absolutely demolish Darwin's antiquated theory, and the neo-Darwinian synthesis, which attempts to marry the findings of genetics and molecular biology to the original theory of transformism, is a complete flop. Mm-hmm. The more they learn about the molecular structure of living beings, protein synthesis at the cellular level, the necessity of a rewiring of the genetic code before you can change the body plan of an organism, the more people realize, people who are honest about it anyway, how absolutely impossible it is to change one kind into another through random mutations, and they don't have any other mechanism besides random mutations acting over time and conserved through natural selection. The theory is dead. So they won't admit it, but it is.
It seems that way, and I think what people expect from traditional Catholics, rad trads, is you're going to be a Bible-thumping guy, and you're going to come in here and appeal to the authority of Scripture. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great for a Catholic audience. But I sense the more I see of your work and the more I see what's going on now with Catholics who are getting fed up with this, you can hold your own scientifically with this theory as well, because it just is so obvious to so many people that it's bunk.
The more of the literature you read from the evolutionist camp, the more you realize no matter how much jargon they pile into their papers and addresses, they haven't a clue about the fundamental transition between life and non-life. They can't explain the emergence of the first cell. They don't know where the first multicellular organisms came from. They can't explain the Cambrian explosion. They have no idea how invertebrates morphed into vertebrates, or how vertebrate fish flopped up onto the land and became amphibians, and certain amphibians became reptiles, others became mammals, and they have no idea at all about the transition from apes to man. They keep attempting to construct a lineage. The last candidate was the Australopithecus, but they really don't know who the immediate ancestor of man is, because there is no immediate ancestor of man. One critic of evolution called the search for man's ancestors among the hominids a fool's errand. The emergence of man is a complete mystery to the evolutionist, because he will not admit the reality that God created man.
Mm-hmm. We've been playing on remnantnewspaper.com that old clip now from Cardinal George Pell and Richard Dawkins debating. And of course, Cardinal Pell is a theistic evolutionist. And I got to say, Dawkins is not it's not a guy I often quote, but it really is an interesting segment to see where Cardinal Pell tells him very solemnly, Adam and Eve, that means earth and life. This is allegory, it's not science. And Dawkins, just like this, says, well, I'm really kind of curious to know, if Adam and Eve didn't exist, where do you get original sin from?
You don't.
And to me, that's in a nutshell, that's the problem.
The existence of two first parents is an article of faith. It's that simple. So anyone who would try to square the circle by marrying Genesis to evolution would have to explain how a process of evolution produced only two first parents. Closely related to that, as a matter of the infallible teaching of the ordinary magisterium, is the creation of Eve from Adam. Eve was taken from Adam. She is one flesh with him, bone of bone, flesh of flesh. That's why woman is called woman, because she comes from man. Up until 1941, 1,941 years of church history, including the pontificate of Pius XII, the church insisted on the creation of Eve from Adam. No theory of evolution would accept that. Therefore, there's a fundamental contradiction between evolution and the faith. And we Catholics know the faith can never be contradicted by true science. So if there is a contradiction between evolution and the faith, evolution is not true science. And it isn't. It's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And anybody who looks closely at its ridiculous claims about the emergence of the various kinds of life will know that it's a fairy tale. They use scientific methods, they use scientific jargon, but all they're really doing is analyzing what is, which they can do to a very sophisticated level of detail, and then speculating about what came before. All of the speculations about what came before are in the nature of historical anthropology, no matter what they try to call it.
It's interesting, too, because as I'm listening to you talk, I mean, and yet, you know, we got a couple, 300-400 men in here. All these men all across the world, are being told that in order to justify themselves with science, we need to take these sacred books of our religion and throw them under the bus. And the thing is, like, just this morning, I Googled Exodus. I wanted to see what they're saying. Now, how slippery is this slope? And if you look at Google, I would encourage our readers to do this. Google Exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt. Oh, what do you know? The first 5 books now of the Bible, according to Wikipedia, are all myth. So you see this slippery slope. Pretty soon, what's going to be left? You know, why do we need the incarnation? Why did we need baptism? Why do we need? What is original sin? What are all these things? And men all over the world are getting that message loud and clear because of theistic evolution, I think.
Well, if there is no Adam and Eve living in paradise, and there is no Abel and Cain and Seth, and there is no line of descent to Abraham, so where did Christ come from? The entire lineage set forth in the books of Genesis would be a myth based upon the existence of a non-existent Adam and Eve. So obviously the existence of our two first parents, and only them, as Pius XII insisted, is de fide. Without that couple, the progenitors of the entire human race, the lineage to Christ collapses, Genesis collapses, the inerrancy of Scripture collapses, our faith collapses. It's that simple. And so the Church has always insisted, including at the First Vatican Council, there can be no conflict between the faith and true science. To the extent that there are conflicts between what God has revealed in Scripture and what purports to be science, that science is a false science. And evolution has amply demonstrated itself to be a false science, a collection of just so stories, an elaborate fairy tale.
And now tonight, I'm sure your opponent, who is a professor from the University of St. Thomas, a well-meaning, great guy, smart guy, it's going to be a wonderful debate. But I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he throws at you, well, if you're going to defend Genesis as history, you must be an old earther. So what do you say to those who want to get into the debate about the age of the earth?
I say what the Pontifical Biblical Commission said in 1909 about the days of creation. It's perfectly reasonable to assume that the days of creation represent periods of time, and that while God created everything out of nothing and at once, endowing matter with the forms of things that are his ideas, he might have done so in stages, so that in each stage he created things ex nihilo, out of nothing and at once. We're not wedded to the idea that the earth is only 6,000 or 10,000 years old, nor does the Pontifical Biblical Commission or the constant teaching of the Church rule out the idea that there were ages before the emergence of life, or the creation of life in its various forms by God out of nothing. But it has to be a creation out of nothing, because without the forms, which are the ideas that God has of the natures of things by which he informs matter, you can't bridge the gap between nothing and something. What bridges the gap between formless matter and the things that we know as living creatures, above all man, whose form is the soul, is this idea of the form, which is an idea that God implants in the formless matter to give rise to the things that live. That's how creation occurs. That's how God creates. He doesn't create by allowing matter to evolve over centuries without any concrete idea of what each thing is. Or I should say, without any abstract idea of what each thing is that is instantiated in every individual living thing.
So what do you say to those who really, I mean, I'm talking about theistic evolutionists now, they basically chalk Genesis up to being myth. if that's the case, I mean, what about this? Why did God not tell us about how things really went? Why didn't he tell us, for example, that Adam had these sort of, soulless brothers roaming around before he came along?
This is a valid point. The Catholic evolutionists will try to come up with a reading of Genesis that makes it consistent with Darwinian and neo-Darwinian evolution. So you might say that God brought evolution to the point where there were humanoids running around without souls, and he selected two of them and gave them souls, the first man and the first woman. The only problem is, if this had happened, if God had created man that way, why would Genesis not have revealed it? Why does Genesis say, and this is also an article of faith, taught from the beginning of the church, that God created man from the dust of the slime of the earth and then created Eve from Adam. This is absolutely a constant teaching of the church, which is de fide. Now, if the Catholic evolutionist brings God into the picture, another problem arises, because what he's really saying is that without God, what evolutionists claim happened is, in fact, impossible. Evolution is impossible. They need God to make it work. If they need God to make it work, why do we bother treating with the evolutionists or even debating the validity of their theory, which obviously represents an impossibility on the natural level without a continuing series of miracles by God? Mm-hmm. Go back to the Genesis account. Mm-hmm. There's no reason not to.
So what explains it? I mean, there are a lot of very intelligent people who are going to come out here tonight. They're going to debate you. They're going to be upset with what you have to say. What explains this? I mean, is it just an insecurity? People don't study science enough, and so they think, well, they must have it all proved with some sort of wonderful scientific advancements that I'm unaware of. Is that what explains the willingness of so many good guys to say, well, it must be true, Genesis must be bunk? Is that what it is, an insecurity?
Well, they've accepted the received wisdom of the age, which is that God did not create in the manner revealed in Genesis. They've accepted the pseudoscience of evolution because they've been told that this is science, and they don't realize that they've been bamboozled. The more you read evolutionary literature, not just the critics of evolution in their literature, but the literature of evolutionists itself, the more you realize that buried within all of their arguments is an admission that they really don't know what they're talking about, that it's all speculation. So, for example, when they talk about transitional forms, they find fossils that look like they're transitional forms, and based on the pre-existing commitment to lineal descent, they arrange these fossils as if they were lineal descendants. But then if you read their articles, they say, well, we're not really arguing this is a lineal descendant, but it is an ancestor that branched off from the lineal descent. In other words, they can't prove lineal descent. Mm-hmm. What they're doing is taking an a priori commitment to the descent of all things from a common ancestor and then plugging things into it. Mm-hmm. That's not true science. So it's a priori reasoning.
Speaking of true science, a lot of folks are going to say that, from the time of Darwin moving forward, science has made so many advancements in the areas of DNA and genetics,
all of which destroy evolution.
So can I ask you, does that help the evolutionists, or does that help the person who wants to defend Genesis?
The fundamental insight of genetics and molecular biology is this: if you want to redesign the body plan of an organism, you need to go down to the level of protein. You need protein innovations. Different building blocks of life have to be created at the level of the cell, which means you have to rewrite the genetic code. If you mutate the genetic code in any way that approaches a macro change, basically you destroy the organism. Science, so-called evolutionary science, has never demonstrated any kind of macroevolutionary mutation that would be of any use to the organism, that would be anything but fatal to the organism. They can show a point mutation here or there, as with the Drosophila flies, but all they did with the 10,000 different mutations was to produce 10,000 freakish variations on the Drosophila fly. So what molecular biology and genetics have revealed is the impossibility of a new body plan for an organism, the transition from a mammal to a whale, one of the more ludicrous claims, for example, without a complete rewriting of the genetic code, which is impossible on a random basis. Mm-hmm. So why either God rewrote it and turned a mammal into a whale, which is not in Genesis and is a ludicrous attempt to square the circle, or it never happened that way at all, and God created the code from the beginning by creating according to kind. He took formless matter and created the different kinds, which are classes of things that are related, like all the dogs and all the cats, all the and so forth. Created those basic kinds with a genetic potential for variation within the kinds. That's what the fossil record actually shows.
So the fossil record
all the kinds just suddenly appear.
Right.
But when the evolutionist sees this, he says, we know evolution happened because this form appeared and then that form appeared. So clearly there's an evolutionary progress. But they imagine the links. They look at the bushes or the leaves on the trees, and then they fill in the branches and the twigs.
I'm gonna let you go because I know you want to sequester yourself and get ready for this debate. But just one little point, maybe it's more on a philosophical point. When we go ahead and dismiss the scriptural foundations of our religion, and Judaism, by the way, too, but Christianity certainly as well, it doesn't seem to be that much of a stretch to the point where you're saying, well, what else in the Bible shall we skip?
Everything.
Did Jesus actually rise from the dead? Probably not. And I want you to comment on this. If you're going to scrutinize everything that we believe and subject it to a scientific analysis, what is there in our religions that has less, is going to stand up less to scientific analysis than the real presence of Jesus Christ and bread and wine? I mean,
if you attack the foundation of a structure, the whole structure collapses. In 1909, seeing where the modernists were going, the Pontifical Biblical Commission under St. Pius X, knowing that this was going to happen if Pius didn't act against it, set forth answers to questions about the literal truth of the Genesis account. And it answered no to the question whether any of the following facts could be questioned as literal historical facts. Fact, the special creation of man and the special creation of Eve from Adam. Fact, the descent of the entire human race from two first parents. Fact, the placement of the two first parents in paradise. Fact, where they were tempted by the devil under the appearance of a serpent. Fact, and as a consequence, fell from grace and lost, the last fact, their preternatural gifts, not just their moral integrity, but their preternatural gifts, including bodily immortality. All literal historical facts in Genesis. Without those facts, you destroy the foundation of the faith, which lies in the doctrine of original sin and the promise of a Redeemer. And without that, what are we doing here?
and so that is what motivates you then, because eventually we're going to get rid of the whole thing.
Sure, the modernist attacks every aspect of the faith that his seditious novelties can get their hands on. And so this is what Pius X saw. He saw that modernism was the synthesis of all heresies, beginning with the foundation of the faith, which is in the Genesis account, where we see the foundational dogma of original sin being revealed to us in the fate of the first two parents. If you turn that into a fable, you turn our religion into a fable.
That's it. And that's why we're here tonight. Chris, thanks so much for coming out. What do you got anything to say about the argument of the month in general? I think this is your third or fourth appearance.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
Absolutely. There's nothing like it in the United States.
Yeah,
and I mean that. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
You get a bunch of guys, 400 or 500 men, to come out on a weeknight to hear a debate about Catholic issues.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Too bad you can't franchise it.
Yeah,
you should try.
Who knows, maybe.
You should try.
Very good. Thanks, Chris. Good luck tonight. And with Chris Ferrara, I'm Michael Matt, coming to you from the Argument of the Month, South St. Paul, Minnesota, for Remnant TV, and we'll see you next time.